The distress call came through at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in August 2019. The Coast Guard operator in Newport, Rhode Island, later described it as the most haunting transmission she'd ever received in her 15-year career. The voice was calm, almost eerily composed, as if the speaker was ordering coffee rather than reporting a maritime disaster. Coast Guard, this is sailing vessel Prometheus. We are sinking. Repeat, we are going down. Our position is 41 degrees, 23 minutes north, 71 degrees, 47 minutes west. The water is coming in faster than we can pump it out. What made this call so deeply unsettling wasn't just the matter-of-fact delivery. It was what the operator could hear in the background. Nothing. No wind howling through rigging, no waves crashing against the hull, no storm. Just the gentle lapping of calm water and the increasingly urgent sound of electric bilge pumps fighting a losing battle against the ocean. Within 6 hours, the Prometheus, a 42-foot custom-built sailboat that her owners had proudly dubbed Unsinkable, would be resting in 180 feet of water on the continental shelf, taking with her a secret that would rewrite everything naval architects thought they knew about modern yacht construction. The 3 souls aboard would face a nightmare that began not with nature's fury, but with human pride masquerading as precision engineering. This is the story of how a single, seemingly insignificant decision made in the comfort of a Florida boatyard would create a death trap disguised as a dream yacht. It's a tale that exposes the razor-thin margin between maritime triumph and disaster, and reveals how the very features designed to make a boat safer can become the instruments of its destruction. Most chilling of all, it's a story that could happen to any sailor who believes they've conquered the sea through technology alone. By the time you finish hearing what really happened aboard the Prometheus, that perfectly calm Tuesday afternoon, you'll never look at modern yacht design the same way again. Because sometimes the greatest enemy isn't the storm you can see coming. It's the flaw you never knew existed, hiding in plain sight beneath layers of confidence and cutting-edge engineering. The seeds of this disaster were planted 2 years earlier in a prestigious boatyard in Fort Lauderdale, where 2 of the most meticulous sailors you could imagine were putting the finishing touches on what they believed would be the safest yacht ever built by private hands. Dr. Margaret Chen was not your typical weekend sailor. At 54, this former NASA engineer had spent the better part of 3 decades designing life support systems for the International Space Station, where the difference between meticulous planning and catastrophic failure was measured in the thickness of a gasket or the torque specification of a bolt. Her husband, Captain James Morrison, was a retired merchant marine officer who had piloted everything from container ships to luxury cruise vessels through some of the world's most treacherous waters. Together, they represented nearly 70 years of combined experience in environments where attention to detail literally meant the difference between life and death. Margaret had always dreamed of circumnavigating the globe, but not in some mass-produced yacht rolling off a factory assembly line. She wanted something special, something that reflected her engineering precision and James's hard-won maritime wisdom. So, in 2017, after receiving a substantial inheritance from her late father, she made a decision that would consume the next 2 years of their lives and ultimately cost them everything. She bought the bare hull of a Hylas 42, a respected blue water cruising design known for its seaworthiness, and embarked on what she called Project Prometheus. Named after the Titan who stole fire from the gods, the boat would incorporate every conceivable safety feature Margaret could devise, wrapped in the kind of redundant systems thinking that had kept astronauts alive in the vacuum of space. The transformation that followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Margaret and James didn't just restore the boat, they reinvented it from the keel up. Every through-hull fitting was upgraded to bronze. Every piece of standing rigging was replaced with rod rigging, rated to twice the manufacturer's specifications. The electrical system featured 3 separate battery banks with automatic switching, ensuring that critical systems would never lose power. They installed not 1, but 2 independent GPS systems, a satellite communication array that would make a Coast Guard cutter jealous, and enough emergency equipment to outfit a small navy. But it was Margaret's background in aerospace engineering that led to what she considered her masterpiece, a completely redesigned interior bulkhead system that would make the boat virtually unsinkable. Traditional sailboats rely on a few main bulkheads to provide structural integrity and some measure of watertight compartmentalization. Margaret's design featured 7 watertight compartments, each sealed with aircraft-grade gaskets and accessible through heavy-duty hatches that could be sealed from either side. "Even if we hit a shipping container at night," she told James, as they stood in the half-finished cabin one sweltering Florida afternoon, "this boat could lose any 2 compartments and still stay afloat. It's physically impossible for her to sink." James, despite his decades of experience with the ocean's capacity for humbling human arrogance, found himself caught up in his wife's infectious confidence. The engineering was sound, the construction meticulous, and the attention to detail beyond anything he'd seen in 40 years of professional sailing. When Margaret had the boat's stability calculations independently verified by a naval architect, the results exceeded even their optimistic expectations. On paper, the Prometheus was indeed unsinkable. The boat's maiden voyage in the spring of 2018 seemed to validate every calculation and justify every sleepless night they'd spent perfecting the design. From Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas, through the Caribbean, and up the eastern seaboard, the Prometheus performed flawlessly. She tracked straight as an arrow in following seas, powered through head seas with minimal pitching, and handled like a boat half her size in tight quarters. More importantly, every system worked exactly as designed. The watertight compartments remained dry, the redundant electronics never faltered, and the structural modifications showed no signs of stress, even in 30-knot winds and 8-foot seas. By the time they reached Newport in late 2018, Margaret and James had logged over 3,000 nautical miles without a single significant problem. The local sailing community quickly took notice of the distinctive blue hull, with its NASA-perfect equipment layout and military specification safety features. Magazine writers began calling, curious about the couple who had seemingly solved the age-old problem of yacht safety through pure engineering excellence. "We've eliminated the human element," Margaret explained to a journalist from Cruising World magazine as they sat in the Prometheus's immaculate salon that winter. "Most sailing accidents happen because sailors take shortcuts or ignore warning signs. We've designed those possibilities out of existence. This boat will keep you safe even if you make mistakes." It was a bold statement, the kind of absolute confidence that would have made James uncomfortable coming from anyone else. But Margaret had earned the right to such certainty. Her calculations were verified, her systems proven, and her track record in high-stakes engineering spoke for itself. As the magazine article was published that spring, featuring a stunning photo of the Prometheus under full sail against a sunset backdrop, James allowed himself to believe that they had indeed achieved something special. The 3rd crew member joined them that summer through a recommendation from the Newport Yacht Club. Sarah Patterson was a 28-year-old professional delivery captain who had sailed over 50,000 nautical miles, including 3 Atlantic crossings and a Pacific circuit. More importantly, she was looking for an opportunity to expand her offshore experience aboard a serious blue water yacht. When Margaret and James described their plans for a leisurely cruise to Nova Scotia, followed by a fall passage to the Caribbean, Sarah jumped at the chance. "I've never been on a boat this well equipped," Sarah told her parents during a phone call the night before departure. "These people have thought of everything. It's like sailing in a NASA spacecraft." The irony of that comparison would haunt the Patterson family for years to come. Their departure from Newport on August 15, 2019 was picture perfect. A light southwesterly breeze, clear skies and seas so calm they barely registered on the boat's sophisticated motion sensors. Margaret had planned a leisurely coastal route, staying within 50 miles of shore and making daily stops at favorite harbors along the main coast. It was meant to be a relaxing cruise, a victory lap, celebrating 2 years of meticulous engineering and flawless execution. For the first 3 days, everything proceeded exactly according to plan. The Prometheus averaged a comfortable 8 knots under a combination of sail and engine power. Sarah quickly adapted to the boat's numerous systems, impressed by the redundancy built into everything from navigation to communications. Margaret maintained detailed logs, recording everything from engine temperatures to battery voltage levels with the precision of a space mission flight director. On the evening of August 18th, anchored in a picturesque cove near Penobscot Bay, the 3 crew members celebrated their successful start with a dinner of fresh lobster purchased from local fishermen. As Margaret updated her logbook that night, she noted with satisfaction that they had covered 180 nautical miles without a single equipment malfunction or navigation error. "At this rate," she wrote, "we'll reach Nova Scotia ahead of schedule, with perfect weather the entire way." The next morning dawned clear and calm, with barely enough wind to justify raising the sails. Margaret made the decision to motor sail eastward, using the engine to maintain speed while carrying a light main and genoa for stability. It was the kind of perfect sailing weather that postcards are made of, the ocean stretching endlessly toward the horizon like a sheet of blue glass, interrupted only by the gentle wake spreading behind their bow. None of them had any way of knowing that 180 feet beneath their keel, a process had already begun that would doom them all within the next 6 hours. The Prometheus, for all her engineering excellence and safety redundancy, carried within her hull a flaw so subtle that not even Margaret's aerospace-trained eye had detected it during 2 years of meticulous construction. It was a flaw that would remain completely hidden until the exact combination of conditions arose to trigger what marine investigators would later call cascade structural failure. At 10:30 a.m., Sarah was at the helm, following a compass course that would take them well clear of the numerous lobster trap markers dotting the area. Margaret was below, reviewing weather forecasts and updating their planned route based on the continued light wind conditions. James was forward on deck, adjusting the genoa trim and enjoying what he would later describe as one of the most peaceful mornings of his sailing career. The first indication that something was wrong came from an unexpected source: the boat's sophisticated electronic monitoring system. Margaret had installed sensors throughout the hull that continuously tracked everything from bilge water levels to stress loads on critical structural components. At 10:47 a.m., her laptop computer chimed softly with a low-priority alert, indicating a minor increase in stress readings from the forward bulkhead sensors. Margaret frowned at the screen, then pulled up the detailed readouts. The numbers showed an increase in deflection measurements at the base of the forward watertight bulkhead, but the values were still well within normal parameters. She made a note in her log and continued with her weather analysis, assuming the readings reflected normal hull flex as the boat worked through the slight swell. 17 minutes later, the same sensors triggered again, this time showing a more pronounced spike in stress readings. Margaret set aside her charts and moved forward to visually inspect the area around the forward bulkhead. What she found would puzzle her for the rest of her life, though that would turn out to be a tragically short time. The forward compartment appeared completely normal. The bulkhead showed no signs of distortion or stress cracking. The watertight seals remained intact and dry. Even the sophisticated gasket system she had designed showed no evidence of compromise. Yet the electronic sensors continued to register increasing stress levels at a rate that made no engineering sense given the perfectly calm conditions outside. "James," she called topside, her voice carrying just a hint of concern. "Could you come down here for a moment? I'm seeing some anomalous readings on the structural monitors." James made his way below, leaving Sarah to continue their steady eastward progress. As a merchant marine officer, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect problems before they became emergencies. But a quick inspection of the forward compartment revealed nothing obviously wrong. "The readings don't match what I'm seeing," Margaret said, showing him the laptop screen where stress values continued to climb in a steady upward trend. According to these sensors, the forward bulkhead is experiencing increasing load, but there's no visible deformation and no change in our operating conditions. James studied the numbers with the methodical attention that had served him well during decades of troubleshooting shipboard problems. The pattern was indeed puzzling, a steady increase in structural stress with no apparent cause. But the absolute values were still within acceptable limits, and his visual inspection had revealed no obvious problems. Could be a sensor malfunction, he suggested. You know how sensitive this equipment is. Maybe we're picking up some kind of electromagnetic interference. Margaret nodded, though her engineering instincts told her that multiple sensors showing the same trend was unlikely to be coincidental. She made a detailed note in her log and decided to continue monitoring the situation closely. If the readings continued to climb, or if any visual signs of distress appeared, she would immediately divert to the nearest safe harbor. It was a reasonable, conservative decision based on the best information available at the time. Unfortunately, it was also exactly the wrong choice. At 11:23 a.m., the Prometheus crossed an invisible line drawn across the ocean by forces that Margaret, for all her engineering expertise, had failed to consider during her meticulous design process. The water depth beneath their keel dropped from 120 feet to over 300 feet as they passed over the edge of an underwater canyon carved by ancient glacial action. The change was marked on their electronic charts, but neither Margaret nor James paid it any particular attention. After all, water depth mattered little to a sailboat drawing less than 6 feet. What they didn't understand, what no recreational sailor would be expected to understand, was that the canyon edge marked a critical boundary in the ocean's acoustic properties. The deep water beyond this point acted like a natural amplifier for certain low-frequency sound waves, including those generated by a phenomenon that Margaret's NASA training should have made her instantly recognize: structural resonance. Every engineered object, from suspension bridges to spacecraft, has what engineers call a natural frequency, a rate of vibration that, when excited by external forces, can cause catastrophic oscillations. Margaret had accounted for this during her bulkhead design, ensuring that the boat's structural components would not resonate with normal wave action or engine vibration. What she had not considered was the possibility of excitation from an unexpected source operating at frequencies she had never tested. The source, in this case, was the Prometheus herself. Margaret's beautifully engineered watertight compartment system had created an unintended consequence that would only manifest under very specific conditions. When the boat's hull moved through water of a particular depth, at a particular speed, with a particular engine RPM, the 7 sealed compartments began to act like organ pipes, each resonating at a slightly different frequency. Under most conditions, this resonance was too weak to cause problems. But when all 7 compartments achieved harmonic synchronization, something that required the exact combination of variables they had encountered at 11:23 a.m., the cumulative effect was devastating. The forward bulkhead, despite being engineered to aerospace standards, began to vibrate at its natural frequency with increasing amplitude. Margaret's sensors were detecting the early stages of what would become a cascade failure as the bulkhead's mounting points experienced stress loads that exceeded their design parameters by orders of magnitude. At 11:31 a.m., Margaret's laptop screen suddenly lit up with multiple alarms as every structural sensor in the forward section triggered simultaneously. The stress reading spiked beyond the red line, indicating immediate danger to the boat's structural integrity. But even as the alarms sounded, Margaret could see no physical evidence of the crisis unfolding around her. "Sarah!" James shouted toward the cockpit. "Reduce engine speed immediately. We're showing structural stress indicators." Sarah quickly pulled back on the throttle, but the resonance effect had already reached a critical threshold. The harmonic vibrations had been building for over 8 minutes, storing energy in the bulkhead structure like a guitar string being slowly stretched beyond its breaking point. Reducing engine speed slowed the rate of energy accumulation, but could not dissipate the forces already locked within the boat's framework. Margaret stared at her instruments in growing alarm. As the readings continued to climb, despite the reduced engine speed. Her aerospace engineering background told her that they were experiencing some form of structural resonance, but the specific mechanism eluded her. She had never encountered a situation where multiple sealed compartments could create harmonic feedback strong enough to threaten the integrity of properly designed bulkheads. "We need to shut down all systems and drop anchor," she told James, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "Something is fundamentally wrong with the boat's structural response, and I can't identify the source." James nodded and headed topside to coordinate with Sarah, while Margaret began the process of systematically shutting down every system that could contribute to vibration. The engine went silent, followed by the generator, the air conditioning, and even the electronic autopilot. Within minutes, the Prometheus was drifting quietly in the gentle swells, her sails luffing softly in the light breeze. For a few precious minutes, it seemed like Margaret's conservative approach might have solved the problem. The stress readings plateaued and began to show signs of gradual decline as the accumulated resonance energy slowly dissipated. Margaret allowed herself a moment of relief, mentally preparing to compose a detailed incident report and begin the process of identifying and correcting whatever design flaw had caused the anomalous behavior. But the forces at work within the Prometheus's hull were more complex than even Margaret's sophisticated understanding of structural engineering could comprehend. The resonance effect had been building for over 10 minutes before she detected it, and the energy stored in the boat's framework could not be dissipated quickly enough to prevent the inevitable outcome. At 11:44 a.m., the forward bulkhead mounting bolts, each one specified to withstand loads far exceeding anything a recreational sailboat should encounter, began to fail in rapid succession. The first bolt snapped with a sound like a rifle shot, sending a shockwave through the boat's structure that Margaret felt through the soles of her feet. Before she could even process what had happened, 3 more bolts failed in quick succession, each failure adding to the catastrophic load redistribution that was tearing the boat apart from the inside. "Margaret!" James's voice carried a note of panic that she had never heard in their 23 years of marriage. "The forward compartment is flooding. The bulkhead has separated." Margaret rushed forward to find a scene that contradicted everything she thought she knew about marine engineering. The forward watertight bulkhead, her masterpiece of aerospace design and precision construction, had completely separated from the hull along its base mounting points. Ocean water was pouring through the gap at a rate that exceeded the capacity of every pump aboard the Prometheus combined. But this was only the beginning of their nightmare. The failure of the forward bulkhead created a new resonance pattern within the remaining compartments, each one now experiencing altered acoustic properties as water filled the forward section. Margaret watched in horror as her laptop screen showed cascading failures spreading aft through the boat's structure like a disease. The second bulkhead began showing stress spikes within minutes of the first failure, followed by the third, then the fourth. "Sarah, activate the emergency beacon and prepare the life raft," James ordered as he joined Margaret in the rapidly flooding forward cabin. "This boat is going down, and we need to abandon ship while we still can." Margaret stared at the incoming water with the expression of someone watching their life's work dissolve before their eyes. The boat she had designed to be unsinkable was sinking in perfectly calm weather due to a failure mode she had never imagined possible. Her redundant safety systems, her aerospace-grade engineering, her meticulous attention to detail, none of it mattered when faced with the fundamental flaw that had been built into the boat's very design. "How is this possible?" she whispered, more to herself than to James. "The calculations were perfect. The engineering was sound. This shouldn't be happening." James grabbed her shoulders and looked directly into her eyes with the authority of a man who had faced maritime emergencies before. "Margaret, the calculations don't matter now. What matters is getting off this boat before she takes us down with her." The next 20 minutes would test every aspect of their emergency preparedness and survival training. Sarah managed to deploy the 6-person life raft while James gathered critical survival supplies from the boat's extensive emergency stores. Margaret, meanwhile, struggled to accept the reality that her engineering masterpiece was becoming their tomb. The second bulkhead failed at 12:03 p.m., followed by the third at 12:07 p.m. Each failure accelerated the flooding and increased the instability of the remaining structure. By 12:15 p.m., the Prometheus had settled noticeably by the bow, her deck tilted at an angle that made movement increasingly difficult and dangerous. "We have to go now," Sarah shouted from the cockpit, where she was holding the life raft alongside the sinking yacht. "The boat's becoming unstable!" Margaret made one last desperate attempt to understand what had gone wrong, downloading the structural sensor data to a waterproof tablet before the boat's electrical systems were overwhelmed by the flooding. It was an act of scientific dedication that would later prove crucial to understanding the disaster, though at the time it seemed like mere academic stubbornness in the face of mortal danger. The three survivors managed to abandon the Prometheus at 12:23 p.m., just 24 minutes before she would disappear beneath the surface in a final display of the engineering excellence that had doomed her. Even as she sank, the boat's sophisticated systems continued to function, her navigation lights still flashing and her bilge pumps still running in a futile attempt to fight the ocean. The life raft that Margaret had selected with her characteristic attention to detail proved to be their salvation. Equipped with enough supplies for 12 people for 30 days, it provided a stable platform from which they could watch their dream yacht disappear into the depths and contemplate the implications of what they had just experienced. The Coast Guard rescue helicopter arrived at 2:15 p.m., guided to their location by the boat's emergency beacon and Sarah's professional use of handheld radios. The three survivors were winched aboard in good condition, though Margaret remained in a state of shock that had nothing to do with physical trauma and everything to do with the collapse of her fundamental understanding of engineering principles. The investigation that followed would consume the better part of 2 years and involve expertise from fields ranging from naval architecture to acoustic engineering. Margaret's decision to download the sensor data in the final minutes before abandoning ship provided investigators with an unprecedented record of structural failure in real time, data that would revolutionize understanding of harmonic resonance in recreational yacht design. The key breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Robert Hayes, an acoustic engineer from MIT who specialized in studying resonance effects in large structures. When Margaret's sensor data was subjected to sophisticated frequency analysis, Dr. Hayes identified the signature of what he termed multi-cavity harmonic amplification, a phenomenon where sealed compartments within a moving structure can create standing wave patterns that dramatically amplify vibrations at specific frequencies. What Dr. Chen created, Dr. Hayes explained in his final report, was essentially a floating xylophone. Each watertight compartment resonated at a slightly different frequency, but when environmental conditions aligned perfectly, all 7 compartments synchronized to create resonance amplification far beyond what any individual compartment could generate alone. The specific conditions required for this catastrophic resonance were remarkably precise. The water depth had to be within a narrow range that created the right acoustic reflection properties. The boat's speed and engine RPM had to combine to generate vibrations at exactly the right frequency. Even the air temperature and barometric pressure played roles in fine-tuning the resonance characteristics of the sealed compartments. The probability of all these factors aligning simultaneously was extremely low, the Coast Guard's final accident report concluded. Under different conditions, the Prometheus could have sailed safely for decades without ever experiencing this type of failure. Dr. Chen and Captain Morrison were extraordinarily unlucky to encounter the precise combination of variables that triggered the cascade structural failure. But Margaret Chen, reading the report in her Florida home 18 months after the sinking, found no comfort in discussions of probability and unlikely coincidences. She had designed the boat to be safe under all reasonable conditions, and she had failed to anticipate a failure mode that, while improbable, was entirely preventable with proper understanding of acoustic engineering principles. "I was so focused on making each individual system as safe as possible," she wrote in her own analysis of the incident, published in the Journal of Yacht Design, that I failed to consider how those systems might interact with each other in unexpected ways. The watertight compartments that I designed to save us were exactly what destroyed us. The broader implications of the Prometheus disaster rippled through the recreational boating industry with surprising speed. Naval architects began incorporating acoustic analysis into their design processes, testing for harmonic resonance effects that had previously been considered irrelevant to yacht design. Boat manufacturers started including warnings about optimal cruising speeds in specific water depths, though few boat owners understood the complex physics behind such seemingly arbitrary recommendations. More importantly, the incident became a case study in the dangers of overconfidence in engineering solutions. Margaret's NASA background and meticulous approach to yacht modification had created a false sense of security that blinded her to failure modes outside her area of expertise. Her story became required reading in engineering schools as an example of how specialization can create dangerous blind spots in complex system design. Sarah Patterson, who had survived 2 previous sailing emergencies in her professional career, found her perspective on yacht safety fundamentally altered by the Prometheus incident. I learned that the most dangerous boats aren't the obviously unsafe ones with broken equipment and careless maintenance. She reflected in an interview 3 years later. The most dangerous boats are the ones that make you feel completely safe because they prevent you from maintaining the healthy respect for the ocean that keeps sailors alive. James Morrison, despite his decades of professional maritime experience, struggled with survivor's guilt and second-guessing that plagued him for years after the incident. "I should have trusted my instincts," he often said. "When Margaret started getting those strange readings, something deep down told me we should head for port immediately. But her engineering expertise and our confidence in the boat's design overruled that instinct." Sometimes the old sailors' superstitions about respecting the sea turn out to be more valuable than all the technology in the world. The physical wreck of the Prometheus remains on the ocean floor where she sank, too deep for recreational salvage, but accessible to research submersibles. In 2022, a team from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution visited the wreck site and confirmed that the boat's structure had indeed failed exactly as the investigation concluded. The forward bulkhead lay separated from the hull, and the subsequent bulkhead failures could be clearly seen in the twisted remains of what had once been Margaret's pride and joy. More haunting than the physical evidence of structural failure was the boat's final resting position. The Prometheus had settled upright on the sandy bottom, her masts still standing, and her sophisticated equipment still visible through the portholes. To the submersible's cameras, she looked like she could be raised and sailed away, a ghost ship waiting patiently for a crew that would never return. The 3 survivors went their separate ways after the investigation concluded. Sarah Patterson continued her career as a professional delivery captain, though she never again sailed on a boat with multiple watertight compartments without understanding the acoustic properties of the design. She became an advocate for including basic acoustic engineering in sailing education programs, arguing that modern sailors needed to understand the physics of their boats as thoroughly as they understood navigation and weather. James Morrison retired from sailing entirely, selling his share of the couple's remaining boats and taking up woodworking as a hobby that satisfied his need for precision craftsmanship without the risks inherent in challenging the ocean. He never spoke publicly about the Prometheus incident beyond his required testimony to investigators, though friends reported that he would sometimes stand on the Newport waterfront for hours, watching sailboats head out to sea with an expression of profound sadness. Margaret Chen faced the most difficult journey of all. The woman who had spent her career solving complex engineering problems suddenly found herself confronting a failure that challenged her fundamental understanding of how things worked. She underwent what she later described as a complete philosophical transformation, abandoning her faith in technological solutions to human problems and developing a deep appreciation for the limits of engineering knowledge. "I spent my entire career believing that any problem could be solved with sufficient analysis and proper design," she wrote in her final published paper on the Prometheus incident. "The sinking taught me that the most dangerous problems are the ones you don't know exist, No amount of engineering excellence can protect you from failure modes you never imagined. She never set foot on a sailboat again, but she did find a new calling as a consultant, helping other engineers identify potential blind spots in their designs. Her work contributed to improved safety standards in industries ranging from aerospace to automotive manufacturing, as her experience with cascade failure in the Prometheus provided insights that saved countless lives in completely unrelated applications. The legacy of the Prometheus extends far beyond the recreational sailing community. The incident has been studied by psychologists interested in overconfidence bias, by engineers working on complex system interactions, and by accident investigators seeking to understand how multiple safety systems can combine to create new forms of danger. The case is now taught in graduate-level courses on system design, risk management, and engineering ethics. Perhaps most importantly, the story serves as a permanent reminder that the ocean remains fundamentally unconquerable regardless of human technological advancement. The same forces that created the Grand Canyon and carved the continental shelf continue to operate according to principles that dwarf human understanding. Sailors who forget this truth do so at their peril. The Coast Guard operator who took that initial distress call still remembers the eerily calm voice reporting the sinking of an unsinkable boat on a perfectly calm day. She has since handled hundreds of emergency calls from vessels in distress, but none affected her as profoundly as the Prometheus incident. "It changed how I think about safety," she explained years later. "Before that day, I assumed that the most dangerous calls would come from boats caught in storms or facing obvious emergencies. The Prometheus taught me that the most terrifying maritime disasters are the ones that happen for no apparent reason in perfect weather to people who did everything right. Those are the calls that remind you how little we really understand about the forces we're dealing with when we go to sea." The final entry in Margaret Chen's logbook, written just hours before the Prometheus began her fatal encounter with harmonic resonance, captured the cruel irony of their situation with unintentional prescience. Perfect sailing conditions continue, all systems functioning flawlessly. This boat is performing exactly as designed, and I have complete confidence in her ability to handle anything the ocean might present. Within 6 hours, that confidence would be shattered, along with the bulkheads that were supposed to make sinking impossible. The Prometheus would become a cautionary tale about the dangers of believing that any human creation can be made foolproof, and a permanent reminder that the sea's capacity for surprise exceeds even the most sophisticated engineering imagination. Today, when sailing instructors teach their students about the importance of respecting the ocean, they often tell the story of the Prometheus, the unsinkable sailboat that sank on a perfectly calm day because her builders forgot that the ocean's greatest threats aren't always the ones you can see coming. It's a lesson that every sailor, regardless of experience or equipment, would do well to remember every time they cast off the dock lines and head for the horizon. Because in the end, the ocean doesn't care how carefully you've planned, how precisely you've calculated, or how confident you feel in your preparations. It operates according to rules that predate human civilization and will continue long after our most sophisticated technologies have been forgotten. The wise sailor learns to work within those rules rather than assuming they can be engineered away. The Prometheus and her crew discovered this truth too late to save their dream yacht, but their story lives on as a permanent warning to those who follow in their wake. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't the storm you can see on the horizon. It's the flaw in your own design that you never knew existed, waiting patiently for exactly the right conditions to destroy everything you thought you understood about sailing safely.